Hey everyone. The topic I'm going to do today is agreement of the verb with the subject. What this means is that when you write a sentence in English, the verb must agree with the subject. There are several rules to remember while doing this, and to make it easier, I will divide them into half. I will do half the rules today in this lesson, and the other half of the rules in the next lesson, in the next video. So shall we begin then? I'll start a slideshow. So that's the topic for today. Agreement of the verb with the subject. And we'll begin with the rules. The first rule, the subject and verb must agree in number. Number meaning, if it is a singular subject like he, the verb must agree with that. If it is a plural verb subject like this, then the verb needs to agree with it. So depending on whether the subject is singular or plural, the verb needs to agree with it. So you need to check and see whether the subject in the sentence is singular or plural. This is an example for you. He is a singular subject. He eats his dinner on time. We cannot say he eat his dinner on time. Similarly, when you use a plural subject like they, the boys, the children, the men, the women, Ram and Sita, things like that, when it is a plural subject, then you use the verb, a singular verb like eat. They eat their dinner on time. You cannot say they eats their dinner on time. That's the very first rule to remember, that the subject and verb must agree in number. That means you have to pay attention to the subject to see whether it is singular or plural. The next rule, a subordinate clause. Subordinate clauses that appear before the subject and the verb do not affect the agreement. So here we have a clause, who was carrying the cups. And we have the subject here, the waiter. Now we have this subordinate clause over here. Okay, a clause is a part of a sentence that does not make complete sense. Who was carrying the cups is the clause, and the waiter is the subject. Now, even though the clause is here and there is a plural word here, cups, we don't have to look at this word. We have to look at what the subject is before deciding what verb to use. So what we are going to do is, the waiter who was carrying the cups was very strong. Not were very strong, because we're not looking at cups. We are looking at the subject, which is the waiter. Okay? The third rule. Prepositional phrases that appear between the subject and the verb do not affect the agreement. So like we have something like this, the leaves on the tree are green. So what exactly are we talking about? What is the subject? The leaves. We are not talking about the tree. We are talking about the leaves which were on the tree, the leaves. So here it is plural. So the leaves are green, not is green. We can't possibly say is green because we're talking about many leaves. It's plural. The fourth rule. If you start your sentence with here or there, you have to place the subject after the verb. So here's the subject. In this case, an orange, and in the second case, mangoes. Now we are not starting the sentence with the subject because we are starting the sentence with there, or in some cases maybe here. So this is the sentence, there is an orange on the table. And the reason we are using is because we're talking about a singular subject, an orange, one orange. And in the second case, there are mangoes on the table. The reason that we are writing are is because we're talking about a plural subject, which is mangoes, many mangoes, not one. Okay. The fifth rule. If there are two subjects joined by and, they will need a plural verb form. Okay. So you have dal and rice as my favorite dish, but in this case we're considering dal and rice as one thing. So it's my favorite dish. Okay. But if you have two different subjects, Then you need a plural verb form. The sixth one, if the sentence has words like each and every, you have to use a singular verb because each means one and every means one. So each of the boys is clever. Every child is present today. We consider it as singular. We don't look at boys even though there are many boys, but we're not talking about many boys. We're talking about each of the boys. Every one of them. Okay? So let's see if you have understood all those rules, then you would be able to do these sentences. He walk to town every day or he walks to town every day? What is the correct thing to say? He walks to town. Second one, boys play football after school or the boys plays football after school? Naturally, it is the boys play football after school because boys is a plural word. Third one, the dog who was rescued by the children was very hungry or were very hungry. Now look at it carefully and think whether we are talking about the children or the dog. What is the subject here? Is it the dog or the children? It is the dog. The dog is the subject. So the dog was very hungry. The dog who was rescued by the children was very hungry. The fourth one, the birds on the tree is very noisy or are very noisy. Again, look carefully to see what the subject here is. Is it the birds or is it the tree? The birds on the tree is very noisy or the birds on the tree are very noisy? The answer is are. Why? Because we are talking about the birds, not about the tree. It is one tree, but many birds. Because it is many birds, we have to use the correct verb. The birds on the tree are very noisy. The fifth one, here is the book I have been looking for all day, or here are the book I have been looking for all day. What's the subject here? Is it here or is it the book? Is it here or is it the book? It is the book. And how many books? Are we talking about one book or many books? One book, right? So you have to say, here is the book I have been looking for all day. The sixth one, there is the potatoes that you needed or there are the potatoes that you needed. Again, what's the subject? Is it there or is it potatoes? It is potatoes. Then again, you need to think whether potatoes is singular or plural. Plural, right? So there are the potatoes that you needed. There are the potatoes that you needed. Seventh one, each of the men is eating a pizza or each of the men are eating a pizza? What's correct? Are we talking about many men or are we talking about each of the men, meaning one? We are talking about one. Each stands for one. So each of the men, each one of them is eating a pizza. The eighth one, every girl in school is part of the Interact Club or every girl in school are part of the Interact Club. What do you think is more correct? Are we talking about the school? Are we talking about every girl as singular or plural? Singular, right? Every girl in school is part of the Interact Club. So I will stop here. Let me go through all the rules one more time. From the beginning, first of all, the subject and verb must agree in number. So you look at the subject and decide whether it is a singular subject or a plural subject. Second, if you have a clause in between there, you don't worry about it. You just look for the subject and decide whether it is singular or plural. Subordinate clauses that appear before the subject and the verb do not affect the agreement. Forget about the clause. Third one, prepositional phrases that appear between the subject and the verb do not affect the agreement. So you just have to look for the subject. What's the subject here? Is it the leaves or is it the tree? If it is the leaves, then it's plural, and if it's the tree, it's singular. In this case, it is definitely the leaves. The fourth one, if you start your sentence with here and there, you have to place the subject after the verb. That's why in the first example, an orange is placed after the verb. Mangoes in the second example is placed after the verb. And in the first case, it is singular, so there's is there. And in the second case, there are many mangoes, it's plural, and so there's are written there. The fifth one, if there are two subjects joined by and, they will need a plural verb form. Okay, but in this case, dal and rice is one dish, and therefore is used because it's considered one thing. You eat it together. Sixth, if the sentence has words like each and every, you have to use a singular verb. So each of the boys is clever because you're not looking at boys. Boys is not the subject, but each of the boys is the subject. Each one of them. And in the second example, every child is present today, meaning every one of them. So you're considering one child, not all of them. And then I gave you all these to think of. So hopefully by now you know the first few rules that influence the agreement of the verb with the subject. That's all for today. I will be back soon with the next set of rules for the agreement of the verb with the subject. In the meantime, keep practicing because practice makes perfect. And of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. I will be glad to help in any way that I can. Thank you and cheerio.